the very long story sort of cut to the end is I've been coaching for a year and a half. I quit my job. Everybody was like, what is happening? And cheering for me. You cannot imagine the amount of emails from people that I worked with that are like, you are the bravest human I have ever. This is like unbelievable, cheering for you. But the more I coached people on like how to live well, the people I could coach most effectively, they were very upfront about their faith. And so I could use my faith to help them.
Hello and welcome to Chat CTK, a podcast exploring life and faith at Christ the King Catholic Church in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm your host, John Stotts, Director of Adult Faith Formation here at CTK. And in this, our 9th episode, I am joined by Christ the King parishioner Staci Roccasalva, founder of Let's Work Happier, a coaching service that helps busy professionals avoid burnout and regain a spiritual perspective on their life and work. Staci and I talk about her journey from corporation to coaching, her discovering the value of silence, and the role of the parish in a balanced spiritual life. Staci, thanks for being willing to share with us today.
Thanks for having me.
How many podcasts have you been on before this?
Well, John, you are looking at it. This will be my first. I've never been on a podcast.
All right. Yeah, I've started many notable podcasters or podcast interviewees. Father Mark had never been on a podcast before he came on.
Okay.
Father Dexter had never been on a podcast.
I love it, but your setup is like so professional. So here we go. I love it.
Great. So I guess for starters, tell us a little bit about how you got to Christ the King. How did you find your way here?
So the outdoor mass really sucked me in. I relocated to Nashville during the pandemic. Well, just before the pandemic. And I was I was born and raised Catholic, but I spent a lot of years sort of like sitting in the back of mass, not really plugged in. And I went to, just before moving to Nashville, I lived in Kansas City and I was at a great parish, but I had done a retreat, Christ Renews His Parish. And that really got me plugged in. I started to come to church on time, and I knew people in the parish, and I loved it. It was sort of like something I had really been missing. And so I wanted to get more plugged in. That's how I got connected with you. But I didn't want to be just sitting in the back of church, kind of like showing up late anymore. So that's how, I came to mass, outdoor mass, sure. And then have, obviously we worked together to set up the small groups, and I've done some other, sponsored somebody in RCIA.
Yeah. I remember getting that email and first meeting you and just seeing the glow of excitement that you had still from that retreat. Not just that, but your desire to share it, which, in my years of ministry, that's what keeps parishes running. It's not just the people sort of at the top, the priest, the staff. It's people who have these profound experiences, and they know that it's not just for them, but there's a bit of a mission involved in that. And I definitely remember that early excitement. Part of your story is that you've been on a bit of a journey from the corporate world into something quite a bit different. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what prompted that change?
Yeah. So I did. I was leading sales and marketing teams for years, and I relocated for a role here in Nashville. But John, forever I have wanted to do something more meaningful. And I really, for a long time, I thought it was coaching. And it still is like, I love to help people get where they're going. But I had this just yearning, is this it? Is this all, I think the pandemic did that for a lot of people. You just start questioning everything. And I remember having coffee with my mom one morning in Nashville, and she said, I just hope I'm around to see you do it. Meaning like my passion, meaning, are you just going to keep doing these things? And it was like, she's 75 and she has survived cancer, and we thought we were going to lose her a bunch of times. And so I really took that to prayer. I can almost see me getting teary about it. Am I really ever just going to, and at the time, it felt like just take some space.
Yeah.
And we don't have space in life a lot. Like there's noise everywhere all the time. I mean, my calendar was like back to back to back to back conference calls. And I just was like, I don't know if I want to live like this anymore.
Yeah. How important to have an ally, who's also your parent, to sense that there's this it. I see that with a capital I.
Yeah.
This it. It sounds like you experienced her desire for you to do it as being freeing and not constricting, not someone saying you need to do something else. I'm not satisfied with how you're living your life. But
yes.
Instead of being an ally of this deeper desire that she could clearly see. Is she still cheerleading you on this journey?
She the biggest cheerleader.
Yeah.
And, I think she knew, though, that it's not like from her, or I don't even know if it's from me. I think it's when you're in a hard season for so long, not using all of your gifts. That's a hard way to live.
Yeah.
And I think she knew I had taken it to prayer and was just like really itching to do something different. The weird part of this story is I don't think it was about the coaching at all. I think there's still something more, but the very long story sort of cut to the end is I've been coaching for 1.5 years. I quit my job. Everybody was like, what is happening? And cheering for me. You cannot imagine the amount of emails from people that I worked with that are like, you are the bravest human I have ever. This is like unbelievable, cheering for you. But the more I coached people on like how to live well, the people I could coach most effectively, they were very upfront about their faith. And so I could use my faith to help them.
Yeah.
And people where it was kind of a struggle and I really could never get that real, and there's nothing on earth that's going to satisfy you. No amount of boundaries or thought work or whatever. I mean, all of those things are good. But the real tools, and in my journey, have been the spiritual tools.
Yeah. I want to come back to the idea of space.
Yeah.
Because I suspect that's one of the tools that you discovered. I know you were second guessing your decision last fall. Once you'd left, probably wondering, did I do the right thing? What am I supposed to do?
Yes.
But then you got some space on a silent retreat.
Yes.
So can you take us back there and describe how that retreat experience affected you and affected the way that you were looking at this decision?
Yes. Okay. So public service announcement. After this podcast, Google cloisters. Do we have show notes?
We do not at this point.
Okay. Yeah. I'm just teasing sort of. But Cloisters on the Platte. It's this beautiful silent retreat in Omaha. A friend of mine suggested years ago that I get on the waiting list. It is 3,000 people deep, this waiting list. It is like as if a church retreat married a nature retreat, but they made it luxurious so people want to go. It is something special. And so I arbitrarily put my name on the list. You have to pick a weekend, like years in advance. And this is how God works. I mean, I was like at what felt like a crisis, and all of a sudden, like you're on the silent retreat that you've been on the waiting list for 3 years. So it was a huge God moment to even be able to go. And then to have, daily mass. I don't want to share too much about the retreat, but just the space, and it's based on the Ignatian principles. And so I didn't really know about that style of spirituality, and it really changed. I mean, just being silent, getting a really good confession, and sort of starting to look in the eye, like, what direction was I going? The priest the first year, his name is Father Casey Bomir. He was so amazing. There were so many things that stuck with me, but one of them was the question, how is your heart these days? And my heart was tired and like you can almost see her kind of like
Yeah.
thinking about it, like just anxious. And, the world is a lot right now. But now I have a different joy about the things. But even just thinking back to how I felt, it was worrisome.
Mm.
And he said, when you answer that prayer, then take it to God. How is my heart is like, oh, I'm whatever. And then it's like, dear God, you just turn it into a prayer.
Yeah.
And it really changed how I started thinking about praying, less about like very formal, just more of a conversation. Like if Jesus was sitting here, what do I want to tell him?
It seems a bit risky, to check in with your heart sometimes, to be really honest about how your heart is, because what if it demands a change? What if you take it to prayer and God is like, oh yes, I care about your heart. You're right that there's an issue here. How would you like to change this? So it sounds like you made a change based on how your heart was feeling.
Yeah. And I'm so thankful. I would not change that for anything, but it is risky. But I think the riskier thing is staying how I was. Like I talk about in my coaching practice, we have recipes, like however your heart is, whatever the answer is. If it's like, it's joyous, you had a recipe to get that joy. But if you're like me and you are struggling in a job that you're like, I don't know if this is using my gifts and talents, or you're exhausted and you're not putting it all at the foot of the cross, you have a recipe for how to stay this way. And that is your calendar and your commitments and what you're doing, maybe how you're moving or eating or drinking, the people you're spending time with, what you're letting into your ears. That's your recipe for how your heart is. And so, we're kind of really thick as humans. It's like kind of like, I'm going to try different tomorrow, but we put all the same ingredients in and our heart still feels the same. But like, if we want to make a different kind of recipe, we wouldn't keep putting the same ingredients. The cake's not turning out. You got to switch something up.
I heard a similar insight expressed in a different metaphor. More of a machinist or an engineer was talking about how your life is perfectly engineered to produce exactly the kind of experience that you're having.
Yes.
And,
yes.
It's sort of input, output, and maybe it's not always that simple. But I hear that there are, from your perspective, there are certain things that if we don't change them, then we can't expect any different outcomes.
Yeah.
And you've named some of those: food, drink, movement. What did you take away from this retreat in terms of a recipe that has lasted or has stayed with you and changed your quality of life?
Yeah, I love that question because the priest gave a really funny analogy. Like before you start a new sewing project, he said his mom would always clear the sewing table. I thought that was so cute. And it's like just to get an evaluation of like, what, if you take everything out, what are you putting in first kind of thing? I was not really on the confession train. I mean, there was probably 30 years of my life that I was like not. I think that was the biggest thing, is to like rip the Band-Aid and get a good confession. And then bring that into my, the priest said, if you get a haircut and you haven't been to confession, consider it. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know how often people get haircuts, but for me, like that felt kind of like, oh, that could be good. And silence. There was significant periods of time where there was nobody talking, and you turn your phone off and you leave it in the room. There's no technology anywhere. I was like, this is where the peace is. So when I came back to Nashville, I would go for a walk without, try to go into, Percy Warner or some Radner, like without my phone or earbuds. And it is so like, that is where God is for me. And then I really kind of got in this habit of trying to drop into a mass. I used to think, well, there's not a good homily, or I was like very focused on like the priest needed to deliver something for me to get something out of mass. And the more sort of I dug in the last couple of years, just about like taking the Eucharist is more than enough. And that has really sort of changed my my heart in many ways, I think.
You just completed your second cloisters retreat.
I did,
right? You
yes.
went back. Can you share a little bit about that? How was it different? How is it the same? How were your expectations going in?
Yeah.
What have you taken away?
I text so many of my Catholic besties and people I know to say, like, this is your second annual public service announcement. Get on the list.
Yeah.
It was even better, I think, because I had lower expectations. Like, there's no way it could be this good as it was last year.
Mm.
And I think it was better. The priest this year, he had a different style, but he really dug into the daily examine and how that can be a tool.
What is the examine?
So and I'm not an expert. I mean, this retreat was like a month ago, so you might know more about it than me, but basically it's a tool that St. Ignatius created, and it's like an examination of your conscience and how are things going. So one of the analogies he used is, I love this because I'm a business person, right? Like in business, we write a SWOT, like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You might do it for large accounts. You might do it for your whole company. And like, it's good to know your weaknesses. You got to keep an eye on them. You got to watch them. You're monitoring them. And somehow in life, sometimes we don't really think about what is in our way. What are our weaknesses? So I thought that was a great analogy. And one of them are like, what's the ways that the devil is kind of like getting in your way? What are the things that are holding you back, keeping you down? And just that examination of conscience, like, how are we sinning? We're all sinning. It's okay. Like, we're trying our best and we're just going to start over again. His advice was to pick one. Don't try to change everything. Just pick one thing that you think is keeping you from God, one behavior or some sin that you have in your life, and track it and work on it. And I thought that was really powerful. He said, what the devil loves is you're going to start really good tomorrow,
Yeah.
Like a new big plan or a new fresh, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he said, just small things that can, on earth as in heaven, like, can you do one small thing better today is better than like some new big thing tomorrow.
And so this is something you do every day.
I haven't been great about it every single day. But I've been doing it probably a handful of times a week. And I've been feeling pretty good about that. It really makes it clear what are the areas that I need to just turn over to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In your coaching service, how has the spiritual journey impacted the way that you help other people and the way that you see what they need?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think this whole journey, I don't think it was about me wanting to coach. I think it really turned out to be more about, like, I didn't want to be living that way anymore. And I wasn't making time or space for the small things, to come volunteer at Room in the Inn. So I came back from my first retreat, and I remember the first time I signed up to volunteer, it was like, I was so annoyed. I got the parking lot duty at the Down syndrome race because I got there so late, but it was this mile, whatever. I was trying to like keep my commitment to myself, do something small. And I was like frustrated, and like, I was trying to be, Christian indifference, but I was basically annoyed. And it turned out to be the most glorious day because I got to talk to everybody. It was like the parking lot duty was perfect for me. And as I went through my coaching journey, I realized it's less about me and trying to help people in the world and more about I needed a season to be living in the way that we're really called to live. And so now I'm contemplating, I don't think coaching has been exactly what I thought or needed. It was never about me anyway. It was just about this pull on my heart. So now I'm contemplating what's next. I think I'll always coach, but more now I have a passion for helping people who are in the space that I was find some different tools.
Yeah. So let's look at that. There may be some listeners who have professions that are very similar to yours in finance, or Very busy people, as we so often are. What is a good first step? If someone's listening and hearing, oh yeah, I'm going to ask how my heart is, but I already know the answer is tired, burnt
Yeah.
out. I want a little bit of this peace. But maybe they're also saying, I don't know if I can quit my job.
Yes. Don't quit your job. You don't need to. I would say, well, the first thing really is like small things are wonderful. Like, and I would ask a question like, if you lose your keys, you're kind of going back to the last place you had your keys. So, like, when was the last time that you remember not being, you know, exhausted or
Yeah.
where was, talk to me about that.
Yeah.
And it might be, gosh, I haven't seen friends in a while, or my significant other and I haven't been out on a date in a while, or, we've kind of been sitting in the back of mass, kind of not paying attention. And, I think our past can be good clues.
Yeah.
I also think for me, something about a confession, like clearing, just that is can be spiritual. I sometimes leave a confession and feel like, is that therapy? Is it confession? It was wonderful.
Yeah.
So that could be a good first starting point. But I would say it's going to take less than you think. So like I thought, oh my Lord, I need to quit my job.
Yeah.
And I didn't probably need to. And I'm glad I did. I think this is part of my journey and story. But if how is your heart these days is I'm exhausted and I'm grateful but exhausted, I think it's like what small thing would help you feel God's presence this week?
Yeah.
Is it, making 10 minutes to pray out loud with your spouse or your significant other? Could you sneak into a 7 a.m. morning mass on Monday? Like, would that be just a different trajectory for your week? Do you need some community? And I also think sometimes asking somebody for prayers is a very small way. Like, and then asking, how can you pray for them is just a really real, in today's world, I think everybody's trying to get everything looking so perfect on the outside. It feels very vulnerable to say, like, we could use your prayers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are some little couple.
What strikes me as I listen to you is that maybe surprisingly, God is asking us to give him some things, but often the things that God wants from us are things that are good for us.
Yes.
God is going to say, I would like you to take a break. That if you want to give me a gift, Staci, wake up a little earlier and just have a cup of coffee and don't do anything.
Yes.
Or take an extra day off. That's what I would really like from you this year for Christmas. Sometimes we think that God only wants us to do these really hard and difficult things. And that's true if we remember that it's often hard and difficult to take care of ourselves and to really embrace the peace that God wants us to have and to let go of the things that are preventing that from happening.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about the role that this retreat or these two retreats have played, and a little bit about work-life balance and some of the tools that can help. Where does the parish fit into this? And you've talked about sort of stepping into mass here and there, but you can kind of do that in any church. Is there any sense for you that being involved in a particular community, like perhaps Christ the King or other parishes, is that at all a part of this this journey for you?
Yes, it is. And I think I want to tell you a story. So it is, but I think it was only because I had this sort of like yearning for it. I didn't know what I was missing before I had it. We have communities everywhere, but like it should be our number one community. And not to should on ourselves, but
sure.
Okay. So one of the last priest at Cloisters talked about every decision we make is based on a value. And every value has a structure. And then he went on to tell this story about this university that has a basketball team. It's a Catholic university and they have a basketball team. And he said he divided the students into two groups. One of the groups was going to talk about how do you get involved if you want to like be involved in the basketball community at the university. That was half the class. The other half was, what do you want to do if you want to really grow in your Catholic faith at the university? So he divides up the students. They go in separate rooms. They come back to do this readout to the class. And the basketball people had like several poster boards, all kinds of things. It was like a full-on presentation about how you can like amp up your basketball life.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, great, whatever. Move on to the Catholic group. And the students were looking at each other like all panicked because they had mass. You go to mass.
That's it.
Yeah. And he's, he jokes. He said, I didn't get fired, but I was close. He said, and I asked them, based on this, do you think we are a Catholic university with a basketball team, or are we a basketball university with mass? And then he posed a question to us, as you go into your life, I want you to think about what values do you have and what structures support them. He said, if you value your money, you have a financial advisor, you have a plan, you have a budget, you check your stuff, you've got like looking at the stock market. And if you value like your spiritual life, what are the structures you are putting in place? Who are you in community with? What are you doing? How are you spending your time? And I mean, I think we were all just like, whoa.
Yeah.
And it's good. And he had such a sweet sense of humor. And it was just he was a great storyteller. It was very endearing. It wasn't to like shame anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of like hits you right in the face.
Yeah.
And so I came back and it makes you look at your calendar and your week. What am I doing to serve the parish community, and how am I supporting other people? And I think the benefit of having sponsored somebody in RCIA is now I've got like a little community of people.
Yeah.
And I've started to serve just a couple weeks at Room in the Inn, which has been lovely. And it's made me realize in order to be part of a parish community, you got to show up.
Yeah. Father Dexter likes to talk about the Eucharist, our liturgy as being, the heart of the parish. It's where life flows from and where it flows back. But that assumes that there are other things that need a heart, that it's not just, you don't just have a heart. The heart serves the wider body. And I hear you talking about assembling something like a structure, a body of faith that's fed by the Eucharist. But that is not just showing up for Mass on Sunday.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
That is a good question. Will you pray for me about that?
We'll ask everyone. Everybody pray for Staci. What's next?
I don't know. I think I'm contemplating corporate jobs.
Wow.
And I think action breeds clarity. So I'm wondering and praying about if there's a balance to, my passion for coaching and leading teams. I also, in some ways, feel like maybe I'm called to do some retreats or something more like in this area.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think.
Are you worried?
No, because I'm like, did I wake up worried? Yes. And then I told you this before we sat down. And then I decided like, I'm not going to skip my workout class. I bopped over the cathedral for 7:00 Mass and, here we are. So I'm not worried because every time I've really turned it over to God, it has been the most beautiful story.
Yeah.
And I think he's writing one.
Yeah.
And, I love the question, like, do I have enough for today? because we're trying to solve for like next year, retirement, our whole life's plan. Bishop Barron had something he wrote the other day that was like, if you're wondering about your vocation, God is not going to like give you a 20-page PowerPoint about what it is, but like what am I being asked to do today is just has to be enough for right now.
It's been such a privilege to listen to your stories and to talk to someone who is, midway on life's journey without all of the answers, but with enough to take that next step. Sometimes I feel like we're looking for experts, for gurus, people who have arrived so that they can just like give us the secret, give us the key. But so often, as we were talking even before we started recording, it's finding the people who are in it with you and finding ways to support one another and to learn from one another as we all journey together to wherever it is that we're going. That makes us so rich and exciting, and also a little bit scary sometimes.
A little bit scary sometimes, but it's so good. Yeah. Good. Just want to be a person who trusts God the most. Then it's like we just need today, Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I love it.
Yeah. Thanks for being on. Thanks for listening to Chat CTK, a new podcast exploring life and faith at Christ the King Catholic Church. Future episodes will feature interviews with CTK parishioners, staff, and clergy about their experiences of God, Catholicism, and faith in everyday life. Our gratitude to parishioner Brian Steinberg for graciously using his time to edit and process this podcast. You can find new episodes at our website, ctk.org/chatctk, or you can subscribe to the podcast using Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app.